a PhD in political science. I was, for 26 years, a professor of sociology. I have been, for the past 19 years, in the anthropology department and the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Across these 3 or 4 disciplines, over these many years, I do exactly the same thing. I study how law works as an institution, a set of practices, a set of texts. I specifically study how this ancient institution has been built from the bottom up by citizens' demands and the stories people tell about the law. I did not know this 40 years ago, or more actually a lot more, than when I started graduate school. This wasn't my trajectory at all. And it's what not knowing my trajectory or thinking it was something different led to my initial and long-lasting failures as an academic. To put this in context, I started my PhD about 2 months after I graduated from college. In 1962, there weren't very many women who entered PhD programs at the University of Chicago. But entering in '62 was an extraordinary thing to do. 4 women out of 100 graduate students in political science. But what was even more extraordinary is I did not graduate until 1978. 16 years. That is not the career of a star. That is a failure. That was regarded as a failure then, and it was. If we have students who take 7 or 8 years for their PhDs, we treat them, if not failures, but certainly not great successes. Why did it take me this long? I want to tell you 2 specific incidents that illustrate my failure. So why did I go to take a PhD in political science? It was the first course in college that I liked as a freshman. I thought, well, this is better than high school. I'll do a lot more of this. But by my senior year, I had been identified, not necessarily as a star, but as an honor student, and put in a seminar with other honor students in which we were going to be taught the history of political science and how people had studied it, and we would read high-level modern theory, not the ancients, but what contemporary scholars were trying to produce to explain the way contemporary political systems work. And I fell in love with it. And I decided I'm going to go and do this. And so my advisor in college said, well, you should go to the University of Chicago because they have the best of political theory. They have the ancients, the best scholars who study the ancients, and the best who do contemporary systems modeling of political systems. And I said, that's what I want to do. And I went to the University of Chicago to study with a man whose name was David Easton, who had written this magnificent set of books about politics as a system. And when I went to see him after my first year, you take courses, and in the second year, you go and you talk to a faculty member about doing research on your second year paper, which in those days had to be a master's thesis, but these days we call it second year paper. And I said to Professor Easton, I've come because I want to study with you. I want to study systems theories of politics. He said, I don't really do that anymore. I figured that out, and now I'm working on children's socialization to politics. If you want to work with me, come. I'll show you. We're doing surveys of young children. We're working in the schools, and that's what I do now. I said, oh, no. I really want to do systems theory of politics. He said, well, if that's what you want to do, but I'm not really that interested in it. but I'm not going to stop you. And nobody was interested, it turned out. And I went from one department to the other at the University of Chicago looking for an empirical example where I could study the failure of a political system. It took me quite a while, and every time I went from one department to another, asking for an example of a failed political system so I could test Professor Easton's theory, they'd say, well, no, that they don't have political systems in tribes, and they don't have, all the past they couldn't see as a political system, but I found one. I found one, and it was the Abbasid Caliphate from 750 to 1258, and then it died. Many of you may know that or not, but in 750, the Caliphate was the most powerful and extensive political system in the world. It went from the Atlantic in the east all the way to the Indus, the east, I got that back, west to the east. And I went to work in the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, tracing why did the Caliphate fail. It doesn't matter. It took me 3 years to write these 200 pages that nobody has ever since read, neither Professor Easton or anybody else. But that's what I did. Eventually, I got past my qualifying exams, and I was going to go on to do the dissertation. By then, my husband had joined the faculty at MIT, and I had left Chicago, and I was a wife here in Boston looking to continue my intellectual world. I went first to the MIT Political Science Department, thought I would hang out there and see if I could find people to talk to. But in 1967, that was a hotbed of security and CIA and a few other things, and I wasn't so interested in that. So I went over to Harvard to check out the government department there, but they had the star of classical ancient political philosophy who happened to be the student of the person at the University of Chicago, and I said, well, no, I had all that already. I don't need that. And I just met somebody who, in a photography class, I was doing anything but studying for my PhD. And in this photography class, actually here at MIT, with Minor White, who's a great photographer who used, right? Yeah. And so I was taking this class in photography, and the guy in the dark room next to me, we became friends, and he's telling me that his wife is studying in the sociology department at Brandeis, and that I should meet her. We got together, we met, and she said, well, you know, I have a teacher at Brandeis in sociology, talks the same way you do about politics and the state. Why don't you come? So that's the first thing. So now I'm moving from political science to sociology, and I go to Brandeis, and I find a sociologist who says, oh, I'll teach you about politics and the state and law. Come study with me. And so I did, and for a year I went to classes in the sociology department at Brandeis, and I studied social theory, I studied deviance, I studied ethnomethodology, I studied the sociology of law, and at the end of this year I wrote a dissertation proposal about the enforcement of morals. And this is what I was going to do. And I took it back to the University of Chicago, and I said, this is what I want to do. Teach me. I don't know how to do research. And they said, well, let's think about it for a while. And for a week, every day, a different professor would interrogate me about what I had learned in this time I was away. And they would say, oh, this is all very interesting. And I would say, but I don't know how to do research. Nobody's taught me. I just know how to read and write papers, but I don't know how to do research. And finally, they said to me, well, why don't you go back to Boston and read some more? And that was it. So I went to see Egon, a man in the sociology department at Brandeis, who I had found and who was teaching me all of this, and I told him what my committee at Chicago had said, that they said I should come back and read some more. And Egon said to me, are you willing to listen now? I said, what do you mean? He said, are you willing to listen? I thought I had been listening. I'd been sitting in his classes. I'd been studying at Brandeis informally. I'd been studying, but I wasn't listening. He said, what do you mean I'm not listening? He said, you want to study the law. You want to study how the law works. Well, I'll tell you, you should go to the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts. They just passed the most revolutionary statute in American capitalism. They have given the citizens of Massachusetts a lawyer to represent them against businesses if there's a failure. It's called consumer protection. It was the most revolutionary statute passed in 1967. You want to understand the law? Go watch the Attorney General's office. I thought, I want to write about justice. I want to write about big political systems. I want to talk about important things, freedom, equality. He wants me to study refrigerators. He wants stoves, engines that fail, roofs that leak. I thought, this is why would I want to do that? He said, are you willing to listen now? I thought I had been listening. I want to write about justice, political systems. I want to write about equality. I don't want to write about roofs and refrigerators. And I went home and I told my husband, who was already probably tenured, and I'm still wallowing. And I said to him, I want to write a great thesis about political systems and the law and how it works and doesn't work, and about freedom and equality. And he said to me, you want to be a scholar? You need a mentor. He wants to mentor you. I would do what he says. That was lesson number one, okay? So I went back, and I went to the Attorney General's office, is where he sent me, and I said, can I watch? Can I watch you, make a better market in Massachusetts? And I studied refrigerators and stoves and engines. And at the end, I wrote a dissertation on the enforcement of consumer protection law. And I've been writing about how the law works down on the ground for consumers, for safety. I actually study things like this. I study exit signs. I study the sprinkler systems. This is what I have been doing for 40 years since I finished that dissertation. I study how the law works every single day. And it has been a pretty good life, pretty good life. I was perhaps the oldest graduate student by the time I finished. I was one of the youngest when I started, but when I was finished, I was one of the oldest. But I tell this story to my graduate students sometimes, and I say, there's a lesson here. The lesson is you don't have to study what you are passionate about, but you have to have a passion for studying. And that's how it ended up. Thank you.